Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another fun Iowa.NET user group meeting. Tonight we've got a good friend of mine, Jeff Langr. He's going to talk about how to deliver good vibes with AI. Jeff and I have known each other for a bit now since we worked with each other. He used to look much younger, but Jeff's a really interesting cat. Not only is he a real nice guy, but he actually has a pretty strong history, uh, especially in the software space with practices. I just ended up reading his book, his latest book, and I'll let you talk a little bit more about that. Unit testing in Java. That was really good. Normally we don't talk about Java at the .NET user group, but we're going to make an exception today. And today's session is brought to us by Source Allies. They're our platinum and meeting sponsor. Is anybody here from Source Allies? Would anybody like to say hello and give a little spiel on who Source Allies is? One of the agencies here in Des Moines. They've been a real long time partner for not only the .NET user group, but a lot of other user groups. So it's pretty cool that we've got such a good community in this area and the companies are supporting and making this possible. So with that, I'll hand it over to Jeff and I'll let Jeff kind of do his thing. He's not a stranger to this, so take it
Yeah,
away.
good. Yeah, thanks a lot, Dustin. Great to see everybody here. Thanks for coming out and during your dinner time. I appreciate that. That's awesome. Yeah, Dustin, when did we meet at GeoLearn? So I worked for a company called GeoLearning out of Des Moines in 2010, along with Tim Ottinger. Actually, I was mostly remote. I was showed up once, and then they told me we don't have a lot of room for you folks, so just stay at home. So we were remote for about a year there, and that's where met a lot of the folks who run around the Des Moines circuit. What's it? Lean techniques. I know a lot of those folks, and so on and so on. So yeah, been there enough. I like the town. All right. So yeah. Thanks for the intro. I've been building software forever, professionally since 1982. I don't want to do the numbers because it's too much, and I am old. But ever since I started doing this, I very quickly learned to appreciate the value of clean code. My very first program was in COBOL, I have to admit it, in 1982. And it was a simple report. And basically, so with COBOL, you had to say perform some paragraph until end of file. So the typical way you do it, you write a record out, and the very last line in that paragraph, much akin to a subroutine, but not really, you would say, read the next line from the file. So I'm like, okay, great. Let me put together a job, go ahead and run the job or whatever you do, schedule the job. And then it was scheduled to run late at night and print out a report on the paper. So I come in the morning and the operator, young woman, she's like, so I didn't know if you wanted me to let the job keep running. I'm like, this isn't cool because it was a small file. So she's like, she pulls out this giant box of green bar paper. Turns out I'd forgotten to put the little read record at the end of the paragraph, so it was just in an infinite loop. Read the record, write it out, print it to the printer. Yeah, so that was my first experience with crummy coding, and I very quickly learned test your stuff. So that was step one. So yeah, I mean, it's basically clean code, whatever. Some people hate the term. It's what I see as code that doesn't increase cost to understand and enhance or change the code. That's clean code. That's really what I'm mostly concerned about. So here we are in 2025, and we have these odd little things called LLMs. And the ability potentially to see if you could get an LLM to generate code. And we'll see what it generates by default. I would say it's not clean. So we'll talk about maybe how to approach dealing with it. Talk is not about tools. I use tools. I've got a day job in which I'm using Copilot and just started learning about Claude Code and what we can do with that and the nice, wonderful millions of tokens you generate with a simple thing like a refactoring. So, I'm not a big tools guy. I know how to use them. I can't keep up with them. They are coming left and right so fast. I trust all my peers to do all the keeping up on the tools. Me, I'm far more interested about finding a way we can develop that is sane and sustainable. So that's where this talk comes from. It's about something called AADV, a crummy little name I came up with. Basically, I started doing a bit of exploration around how to do AI generated code when I found myself out of work about running consultancy, or was running consultancy about a year to almost 2 years ago now. And I had a contract quickly enough, but in the intervening time, I spent a couple months digging deeply into what we could and could not do with the LLMs in terms of generating code. So that's where a lot of this comes out of. Last summer, I ran a few classes on this. I'm probably going to start that up again. And they're a lot of fun. It's like 3 hours worth of let's sit and play with this and see where we can get with it. But it's a simple idea. First thing I'll say is you could devise the same idea very easily yourself. So I don't really care who gets credit for it, but I am trying to write on it and do a lot of exploration. So out there is a Substack that you'll find that digs deeply into, some things I know that work well, and then some things I'm still trying to figure out how to get to do best when it comes to building systems. All right. So with that, let me do a share thing. There's the share button. And I want that desktop and oh no, no, that's not the right one. Picked the wrong desktop. Oh for 1. So that's interesting because I could have sworn I selected this one on the right and I did. So let's try that again. What is showing on my screen? It is the slides, right? This thing,
Yeah.
correct?
Your
AI.
ID. Yeah.
Yeah, there we go. All right, we're good. You're going to see a partial screen because I'm going to be popping back and forth between the slides and WebStorm. I'm not going to say the other J word, but we will be looking at JavaScript, which is generally universally readable. You don't really need to read a lot of code, so it's not pertinent. I've done .NET, C Sharp specifically, and enjoyed it. It's a nice little language, but haven't touched that for at least half a dozen years, so I won't really dig into that. Anything I'm demonstrating here, you're going to be able to do with .NET just fine. So yeah, as Dustin mentions, there's a book that came out about last winter, I think, the Pragmatic Unit Testing, which is the third edition, and it's. I think Dustin, you said you actually laughed a little when you read it, which was kind of cool. That's what I was looking for.
It was a fun book to read because not only did it go through the basics of teaching, but there was just a lot of little humorous quips in there that really made it enjoyable. I found that book was really good for somebody first learning testing, and even for myself, decades into it, it's still I picked stuff up from it. It was a great write.
Thank you. Yeah, okay, pitch is over, but it's out there. Hey, if you want to give a review at Amazon, that's the only thing I ask. There is a chapter at the end of it. I bring it up mostly because I can justify it because I wrote a chapter, and again, this is now we're talking. What year is this? This is 2025. I don't know. Maybe the beginning of 2024 is when I wrote that chapter on how you might begin to approach things. And it still, I think, holds up. Certainly the LLMs have advanced a bit in their capability, well, quality of responses, but the core philosophies are going to hold steady. There's also a new edition of Clean Code coming out this year. Robert Martin invited me back to write take the same chapters I've written for the initial one and rework them. So there's those couple of things. And as I tackled the clean classes stuff that I had written about, made sure I threw in some thoughts about how does software design fit in a modern world where you're going to have LLMs help you build software? Do we even care anymore about design? We'll definitely touch on that during this presentation. So let's go on with the show. Let me make sure this has focus. There we go. So let's start with a quick demo. And what I want to do for this is basically something really meaty and tough and challenging for even a human to generate. Like, let's say you were to pose an interview problem and want to throw a nice, tough interview problem at a candidate. So I'm trying to think what would be anybody have a good idea for what you might throw to an interview candidate as a programming problem? What's a good thought? I don't know. This is the first time I will wait until someone gives me an answer. We might be here for a while. Chris, I see the unmute.
There's always the fizz buzz. I think people like that one for some reason.
Facebook. Okay.
They
Yeah, I've
do
heard that, right? It's
the
like
simple
supposedly.
checklist one or oh sorry, yeah.
No, that's that. The FizzBuzz thing is amusing because yeah, we throw it at developers and it's literally like 4 or 5 lines of code, right? So yeah, let's try something tough. Oh wait, now let's do FizzBuzz. All right, we're gonna do FizzBuzz. So this is just an introductory thing to give you a real quick picture of what we're dealing with. What would be a appropriate prompt for FizzBuzz? What might we want to ask our? And I'm going to use, by the way, the ChatGPT client here just because it keeps things simple. You can certainly do all of this with tooling, and I'll talk little tiny bits about how some of those pieces fit in. But for the most part, we're just going to go straight and simple and do this in a chat client. So what might I want to prompt ChatGPT here? What's a nice, succinct way of asking for it to generate FizzBuzz?
Well, that might not be a good one because like you can just probably ask it about fizz buzz and it may even know about it because it's so popular as a sample, but
Okay, I like that. So I said I want to generate this. So give me a sentence.
I've got to look it up. Actually, I forget what it was like. Uh,
Well, I think, you know what, let's just go for broke and just say FizzBuzz, and I won't even type the word JavaScript because I'm so lazy. Well, there you go. And like you said, it knows FizzBuzz. What a surprise. And I think this is an important thing to stick in your head when you're working with the LLMs. They certainly know quite a bit, and we'll talk about the history of where that comes from. But in this case, all I had to do is suggest a programming language and what I wanted it to do. It's like, oh yeah, I can do that for you. When you look at this code, is it too small, by the way? I hope not. Eh, it might be for some of you. I apologize. It's 3 lines of, well, it's a for loop, a let, an if, and a console log, right? Do we love this code? Is this the kind of code we want to put into production, or maybe what might be some problems with it? Name one thing you don't like about it.
We could get into the magic numbers.
Yeah, there you go. I mean, well, just little things like that. There's a good number that add up. I mean, the fact that this is certainly old school code, good old for loop, which makes it a little more work to read. I've got to look closely at the for loop to see is that proper, and I think it is. On the surface, it looks like it might work. It mixes output with logic, which isn't always generally a good thing to do unless you're doing little quick hacky things like this. Does it work? Can anyone in here bet like $1 million as to this will definitely work or not? Is anybody willing to? If you know anything about JavaScript, that would be making a mistake. It looks darn well like it might actually work. Let's just find out. I will copy that out and drop it into WebStorm into look an empty file with name FizzBuzz. How convenient. And then just run this thing. And it runs, which is awesome. Doesn't hit any errors, produces some output, and I can kind of glance at this and think it probably works. Would you still bet that $1 million? Probably not. I wouldn't. I would certainly want to have some sort of automated test. How many of you are actual unit testing aficionados or test-driven development practitioners? Maybe a show of hands just to give an idea. I can't count the hands, so maybe you can, Dustin. My manager's named Justin, so I realize it makes it really difficult for me. So if I call you Justin, just nod and say yes. So do we have TDD practitioners? Did you notice any, Dustin? Yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah,
So some folks. I
more
mean,
than
to
one.
me, it's kind of silly to build a lot of code, particularly when you have gobs of interesting business logic and not have a way to know over time, what does it do for one? So the tests kind of start describing all of its behavior. Secondly, they help you know if you make changes, do we have a still have a system that we could actually ship into production? This is the same kind of thing. The LLM will generate some code and it's really good at generating lots and lots of code very quickly. With vibe coding, we'll come and talk about that too. You got to spend a lot of time sitting there and looking at that code to know if it is something that I would be willing to ship or not. I'd much rather have tests. So we'll come along to test in a bit. But yeah, right now it's like, no, I don't trust this for beans. Let's go back to slides. Okay. Vibe coding. As of February, this chucklehead who's in a position that pays a lot more than me, so maybe he's not a chucklehead, comes up with a tweet. This is lovely. Idea of defining a whole process within 280 characters, is it now? I don't know. I don't do much tweeting anymore. Give in to the vibes, embrace exponentials, and forget that the code even exists. I do like the last piece of that. And actually, there is a nice little mentality that I am starting to get, which is I don't care so much about the code anymore, at least the individual statements. I do care about them enough that they work, but I don't spend my days writing individual lines of code. Well, I still do because I don't, this doesn't work with everything. But when I'm doing what I prefer to do nowadays, I don't write individual lines of code. I don't write individual functions. I let them all be generated. What I focus on is far more modular design and the interfaces between modules. That to me is more of what it takes to put together a system with LLM, and I don't worry about the implementation details so much. I just say stuff, see stuff, run stuff, copy paste stuff, and it mostly works. Okay, so I mean, with that, I'm sure a million developers are out there now generating gobs and gobs of code, which, this is kind of more my sentiment about vibe coding. Pretty easy to generate a lot of bad code very quickly. I don't know how accurate this trillion number is, but I dreamed it up and I asked my LLM, and it's like, yeah, that's probably right. So if you think about every line of human code written for modern computers as of the 1940s/50s, we've generated, let's say, a trillion lines of code. Probably more, but I'm not going to make that bet. If you take a look at any average code base anywhere in the world, GitHub, Bitbucket, wherever your own company, wherever else code exists, I think most of us on the call here would probably admit to this number that 80% of them aren't really good quality. Generally, most code bases don't have copious tests. Generally, most code bases are harder to understand than they should be, harder to figure out what the logic's doing and figure out how to make your changes to them. So this is why I'm calling these low quality. Michael Feathers might refer to these as legacy code bases. Just tough to work with, harder to work with than they should be or could be if they were designed better and well tested. So if you kind of think, well, what's going to happen when all these people generate all this code with AI? My bet, and the LLM kind of agree with me, but it was like, yeah, I don't know about the time frame. I think we're going to generate at least another trillion lines of code in the next 5 years. So then you think about, well, what did the LLM learn on? Learned on all that lovely crappy code, out of which 80% is definitely bad. Um, yeah, and that's what it bases how to code off of, and we'll talk about that momentarily. But yeah, that's this whole notion that, gee, if we continue with LLMs, if they continue to be the AI of choice for the next, let's say, 5 years, certainly we're going to start seeing LLMs trained on code that was largely AI generated. I don't know. Will it have to be smart enough to exclude its own code? Who knows? This is the Ouroboros effect, I think, the snake eating its own tail, ultimately. And to me, this is going to be hugely problematic as we move forward. All right, so let's start talking about how we deal with some of these challenges. Uh, the first thing is what I call the prime directive for doing AI development with an LLM. Basically, you can't trust any code that it generates. Might work, might not work. Just looking at it might be okay. It's going to take you a lot of time to look at a lot of automatically generated code. So you really want to be able to verify. You trust it like a human. You trust it like you trust a human to generate code that always works. And you realize, yes, they're going to be pretty good most of the time, but they're going to get things wrong. And it might not even be obvious what they're getting wrong. So always make sure you verify the stuff coming out. So this prime directive exists to remind me as I was going throughout trying to devise some process that might work. What do I need to remember at all points in time? I tried doing test-driven development, pure test-driven development, where I write a test first myself, and then started looking at, well, what does it take to generate a test? And then letting the AI generate some code and then dealing with it. It's not really fun. I mean, TDD is wonderful and it's nice and granular and incremental, and those are things that don't really mesh well with doing this through even a good tool or a chat GPT kind of a thing. So eventually I settled on something else that seems to make a little more sense to me. We'll come back to that. At the core, a LLM is basically just a transformer. It's a function or mechanism that says, given a prompt, I crunch it through some data that's been massaged with training information, and ultimately, statistically, try to figure out what is the next word going to be that I should show. And for whatever reason, Kurzweil talks about this in his latest book. We kind of reached a magical point at which it starts to seem like it's a little bit intelligent, even though it's not. It's statistical predictions for the most part, which is kind of fascinating that I can type, a number of sentences and it can come up with this fairly coherent thing that is starting to get harder and harder to tell whether or not it's human written per the Turing test. Still, we know it's kind of an illusion, might be a way of thinking about this. Well, you start looking at code and then you start thinking about why might it work at all with code, because code is very specific. You can't be off by a word. And yet it does a pretty good job. I would say what I'm seeing is certainly 80% compliance. And when I say compliance, I mean the amount of code, I'm sorry, the amount of tests that pass, given that you fully tested this thing. I see 100% compliance quite a bit. I see sometimes where it's not, and it's just got a defect. Even on the same thing I challenge it with, you do it enough times, you will eventually get an error just because of probabilities. The probability of it erroring is smaller and smaller over the past almost 2 years of doing this. It works for a number of reasons. It was trained on a large body of code, which is, maybe a lot of those trillion lines that are out there. Where does that code come from?
Like GitHub.
Yeah, absolutely. Where else?
Overflow, Stack Overflow.
Stack Overflow, yep, learns how, proper answers and stuff. I'd love to see some of how this training all played out and so on. Comes from books, comes from magazines, articles, little postings on wherever out there. So there's all sorts of sources for it. So there's a lot of code out there for it to take a look at and start building some patterns perhaps out of. Um, Uses code-specific tokenization. So the trainers, my understanding is they do understand the programming language. They're granted extended context, so typical prompts don't get quite as much context to be able to process all this in. But for programming, they've tried to make this one of their bigger interests in training the LLM, so that's what they've done. The training did focus a lot on syntactical correctness, so it certainly knows how to put together proper syntax for all those languages. And then there's some sense of sort of logical coherence. It generally understands how to stepwise do things. Step one, do this. Step two, step three, step four, and so on. So it understands that sort of logical coherence, which, if you think about it, is why most of the code it generates is one function, top to bottom, go do your thing, which is not the kind of code most of us want to have to maintain over time. It's easy to read the first time through, but good luck maintaining it. That is generally going to cost more. It's fine-tuned on a bunch of specific coding tasks and data sets. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot in the training that says let's do this. Let's learn about as much about code as we can. And then you think about statistically, programming languages are small and compact, and they do have very rigid syntax. Therefore, statistically alone, the chance of getting the next token right actually comes up quite a bit, particularly when you take all this other training into account. I don't know. There's probably more to it beyond that. I am not an expert in any of these things by any means. Let's take a look at maybe bad vibe coding to quickly get a sense of what it does generate by default, because I just claim that it does this procedural stuff. So I'm going to generate this thing. That's probably my favorite kata called the name normalizer. Anybody ever done this? No. Yeah. If you go out to my GitHub repo, you will find, I think it's called name normalizer is the name of the repo, and you will find starting tests in various languages, maybe a dozen languages, ranging from Python, Java, TypeScript, and piles of others. .NET, there's definitely C Sharp stuff. There's a C Sharp one. I might have even coded it. So you can come back and say, well, I'm not going to listen to this guy because the C Sharp stinks. All right, so let's see what happens. I've kind of cheated because I don't feel like doing a lot of typing. So these little rules here. Hopefully you get the idea. So if we take Dustin, oh my, Dustin Tostinson, sorry, and normalize it, should come out as Dostinson Dustin. Does that sound right? With a comma in the middle. Okay, cool. That's the general purpose. We want to be able to produce a alphabetized list. I'm going to copy all the stuff here. Okay. Let's see how good it can do on just a simple prompt. Okay, so code and name normalizer module, given a Western name and first name, surname format, transform it into surname, comma, first name, so we can produce a list alphabetically ordered by last name. Use JavaScript. Generate, oh, no, we don't want to do that yet. We're just going to generate code. And let's see what it does. Yeah, so this is, again, a small amount of code to look at, and it gives you, it's nice enough to give you some console log stuff. So you require it, you run console logs and basically see if it works by visually inspecting. And we all know that's great for playing with things, but not production-wise ready. The function itself, as indicated, is this top to bottom sort of logic. Let's create some variables, step through some implementation specifics, make a decision or two. If the parts length is less than 2, return something, and there's a nice little comment that helps you guide through the code, ultimately returning a formatted string. So it's logic. It's not great, but same question is, does it work? Would you bet the $1,000,000 that it does actually do what it's supposed to do? Same answer from me. No, I would not. I would feel like I needed a test around this code. And, here's another time I generated a solution. I probably generated this stupid thing a few hundred times. I'm also trying to do some research on this, so maybe even hundreds more than that because a lot of these are automated now. Let's ignore that for now. So why is the code low quality? I gave one hint. It's basically trained to just do things in a very stepwise fashion by default. But why else is it low quality? Anybody want to hazard a guess? Who or what can you blame for its low quality?
That 80% you were talking about earlier.
That 80%, and who is ultimately to blame for that 80%?
That would be Ben Sampica.
Thank you. That sounds nice. This is a bad AI picture of me. I think it's much more handsome than me. So I'll just say, yeah, that's me. Anybody who wrote code is in GitHub or wherever, articles, books, and whatnot. So absolutely, certainly maybe yourself, maybe some of your code is out there that you just hastily put up there and weren't too worried about, high quality for it. Whatever. We are all to blame for this. Eh. Big deal. But I've always said that when you write, you have a responsibility, because I've written a lot of articles. You have a responsibility to make sure that the code that you put out there is the code that you want to see in production, because you well know that most of the novice developers out there learn from those articles and they just copy and paste the stuff in and start from there. So if you don't give them a pattern or template for what is good looking code, you're going to get bad code. So bad examples foster bad code. So this all leads into a big question like, do we care? We got bad vibes coming out of this code. If you don't ever have to touch a code, doesn't matter. And my premise with this whole notion that I'm pushing forward is no, I don't touch the code. If I don't like its generation of something, well, actually, more specifically, it doesn't work, I regenerate it. And then maybe the next time it works. If that's a problem, we can come back and talk about that. But for the most part, I am trying to actively or have been trying to actively avoid writing individual lines of code. So yeah, if I don't have to touch it, does it matter that it doesn't look good? For now, with LLMs, the prime directive says it might be wrong. And at that point, you will probably, excuse me, you will probably need to negotiate with the LLM. We got a problem here. Try running the generation again for the code. Okay, it's still failing. We still have a problem here. Let's focus on this one test. Let's focus on this one function that this set of tests is trying to drive. Maybe we can write some more tests around it. Maybe, and I've had to do this, we need to reconsider the design that we've given for the thing. Excuse me. So, kind of little things I've noticed, like one is stateful code tends to be more problematic. If you're tracking local variables across a longer function, it actually, the chance of it failing or not having full compliance starts to creep up. And it's in my head. I want to get the research done to prove that, but I'm pretty sure that's true. So it might be wrong. Therefore, you probably will need to be negotiating with it. You probably will want to focus on smaller things, reconsider the design, all that sort of thing. If your code stinks in the first place, that negotiation isn't going to go nearly as well as it should. This goes back to my overriding philosophy that smaller modules, smaller functions solves most problems in software design. Ultimately, we got two big problems here that give us bad vibes. The code doesn't look good. It's going to be hard to deal with at any level. Extending it, changing whatever is going to be problematic, and it might not even work. So, thank you, Andre Karpathy. Instead, let's look at something else. Real simple idea, which is, I just gave it away on the prior demo. You can certainly generate tests. And if you give the prompt human examples, I'll show what those look like on the next slide. Those tests have pretty high fidelity. They're not, they're exactly what you asked for. So if you give it some simple human examples that say, here's my input, here's what I expect the output to be, it'll generate tests based off of those and get it right like 99% of the time. And then also ask to generate the code at the same time. Now you get the basis for taking a quick look at the test to make sure that they do have that fidelity with the examples you gave it. Make sure you catch that 1/10 of a percent time where the tests are a little off. And then finally, you just run the test. And as mentioned, I'm getting pretty higher compliance than I was a year ago. I'm getting a lot of cases where I write the examples up and ask it to generate the test and code, look at the test, and I don't have to touch anything. I just move on to the next thing, which is kind of cool. When I say examples, here's some simple functional oriented examples, which just means I pass it a value, I expect a value. So given I've got this name normalizer thing that I just generated, I've got the case where I want to initialize the middle name. My input is Jeffrey John Langr. Right arrow, I expect it to be Langr, comma, Jeffrey J, period. Removes white space from input. So you can format these however you want. I'm kind of settling on a couple simple styles for doing this. Doesn't matter. It gets it most of the time. You know, you can do things like this, which you don't need. You just put the quotes there and some white space around the person's name and expect that the output is Madonna. However you want to do it. Generally, these will work really well. The examples can certainly be procedural or stepwise in nature. If I want to verify withdrawal, deposit $100, withdrawal $58, verify balance 42. That's good enough test. These will If you ask the LLM to generate tests from these will go perfectly into jest test or XUnit tests or whatever you're happening to use. NUnit, anybody still use NUnit? I don't like XUnit very much. All right. So I still am. Was there a hand raised, by the way? So
I just
is
wanted
the
to mention
XUnit?
that we
No,
used to use NUnit.
you still use NUnit?
Yeah,
Oh,
we
that's
just
awesome.
upgraded from NUnit 3 to NUnit 4.
Oh, okay. I didn't even know it was still in active development, but I figure, hey, they should keep it out there. I actually do know, I think James Newkirk helped develop XUnit. And I don't want to slight him, but there's some things. It's opinionated, and I got my own opinions that don't always mesh with other people's. So let's see what this looks like in the form of a demo. We've got all these examples here. We've got a mononym like Plato or Madonna, one word name. Gets rid of white space. We got a duonym, which is, one more than a mononym. Initializes a middle name, and then it supports multiple middle names. And then we have the special case of one president who didn't have but a single letter in his middle name. So let's see what happens when I throw all of this at the LLM. Oh, shoot, what did I just close? I just closed something. I don't know what it was. Maybe it was Safari. You're all still here, so that's good. I didn't close this. Let's see. I think I closed my examples. So let's go back to a command prompt. Let's achieve him. Oh, no, 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 no. Crud. Okay, well, I'm going to steal them from somewhere else. Bear with me just a second. This is a good way. You always expect a demo to go wrong and not in this sort of way by accidentally closing the wrong window. Okay, great. Grep. Name. Nope, not there. Okay, we're gonna have to do it the hard way, which is steal it off the slide. You didn't think I was actually gonna type it, did you? Let's go back to play mode. Okay, and go back. All right. So now that I've wasted your time with that, let's go into here, back into ChatGPT, and ask it again. Oh, go away. Go away. Okay. Actually, I want to do this in a new prompt. So I'm going to do that. I do want the code from here, or not the code, the prompt from here, so I don't have to retype that. Hop back into the new one and paste into here. Okay, so the only difference is I'm going to provide examples, and I will usually set them off like examples and say, here's what I expect you to base what you build off of, and then generate the code. And by the way, I didn't see if the last one worked. That probably would have been wise, but maybe not essential. Wow. Only it doesn't take any time to do this. Yeah, I want a quick answer. I'm not paying for tokens, but boy, when I am, I really recognize it. So that's great. Oh, yeah, oops, I forgot to ask for the test. Yeah, add the test. So normally my prompt says add the test in the production code. I don't normally do this all by hand, so I'm forgetting a couple things. So when I add the tests, anybody muck with Claude Code, by the way? Boy, I had to do a simple refactoring for me. It was 3 minutes of waiting. I was kind of disappointed. Okay. Oh, it doesn't look like it generated the test. Try again. Generate Java jest tests. Okay, here's a jest file. It contains. Okay, perfect. All right, my job once I get it to actually generate the test, sorry that took longer than I expected, is to just make sure that they match what I was looking for. So at this point, I'll go back to the slides because I lost my text file with them, and just quickly make sure that the tests here match. What you'll find is generally the text that you give it trims extraneous white space, matches what's over here. The examples that you give it also tend to exactly match. I see cases every rare once in a while where it doesn't do that, but handles duonym, duonym, initializes middle name, initializes middle name. So my job in this is literally scanning this to look at those test names and look at the examples to make sure that they match what you fed it in the first place. What you will notice is that times the LLM is a naughty, naughty thing, like a child, and it will do things you didn't ask it to. So what we notice down here, whoa, did I, where did that just go? Oh, no, I just lost those somewhere. Uh, no. How in the world did it lose that? Did I click somewhere? I don't know where that went. But at the bottom, what you hopefully saw was basically it added some tests for null checking and whatnot, which seems nice, but I don't want it to generate more code than it's supposed to. So one other thing I'm usually caveating it is, or being very explicit to say, don't add any more code than necessary, test code or production code. And the examples that I give you are essentially the contract that you need to code to. And usually when I say that sort of thing, it does a better job of remembering. But this is part of the problem with the LLMs in context right now. Just in terms of how it prioritizes things, it often forgets about things or deprioritizes them almost completely out of the mix. So every once in a while, you will end up with extra code, even if you ask it not to do so. So now that I lost the code, let me run this one more time. I'm getting a little frustrated with the interface here. Maybe I should use it more often. No, I'm getting more mileage out of Copilot and stuff right now. So let's try this one last time. Okay, there's that. I need to go back to here. Oh, wait. No, 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 no. That's the little other one. Okay, so go back to this. Where is my initial prompt? Come back up to this. Drop this. This time I will ask for tests. Generate just tests. There we go. And do not implement any more than asked. Then, no, that's not the way I want to do it. Any more than the examples specify. Treat it as the contract. Okay. And let's see where it goes. And this time we will try to run this. WebStorm to get ready while it's thinking. Just to be quick, I'm just going to drop it all into a single module and then have the test and production code in the same module, just to be lazy again and not spend the extra time generating another file. Think, 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 think. Do I want to ask for a quick answer? I'm kind of afraid to. Oh, I just noticed what's at top. Did anybody else notice what's on the top bar there of my ChatGPT window?
Is that version 5?
Yeah.
That is version 5. I did not see that before this meeting. So interesting. Oh my gosh. Wow, it's doing a lot more thinking. I don't want it to. I was kind of happy enough with this where it was. As you modernize things, they never speed up because they always get beefier and beefier. Think DOS version 1.0 versus, OS2 version 3 or whatever. Instead of a half-second boot, you now had a 2-minute boot time. Oh my word. Wow. Okay. Well, okay, now it's giving me what I'd asked for in the first place, or I wanted to ask for in the first place, which is both a test and both a production code. I will scan these again as it's spitting them out, mononym, Plato to Plato. I don't like this. This is the first time I've ever seen this nonsense. It's putting the example in the name of the test, so now I'm going to have to tell it, don't do that. Just more stuff I'm going to have to break or tell it to, break its habits very quickly. All right, so let's drop in the tests. There's the test. And let's drop in the production code, and then I'll just get rid of the import stuff. Paste that in there. Drop that line down. Let's share it so we can all see it. Get rid of these two things because they're not necessary. And let's just see how this goes. Again, I wouldn't bet any money on this sort of logic spewed throughout the code. The split thing is probably good, but I've seen even that sort of thing go afoul at times. I do get 6 passing tests, which is great. And again, typically with this exercise, it's gotten better. When I first ran this about 18, 20 months ago, it was more like it would fail 1 out of every 4 or 5 times on just this simple exercise. Now it rarely fails. That's the general gist of it. We still have a problem, which is this code is still kind of stinky. So let's come back to Keynote. But it is code that I know I've specified the examples. It runs all the tests, and therefore I have much higher confidence that I might actually consider shipping this. I certainly probably want some better end-to-end test as well, but good enough for now. One more thing I want to do is basically tell it to write the kind of code that I want to deal with, not the kind of garbage that it spews by default, top-down code. So I defined a style, and I've kind of honed this a bit, and I haven't updated the slide in a while, but this is close to what it is. If you give it a few simple guidelines, it's really generally all you need to produce reasonable code. I'm going to distinguish reasonable from Jeff's rather compulsive notion of what code has to look like. If I'm crafting my own code, it is very explicit. It is very, I think, elegant. And I still, I pair with people, so they tell me, no, that's not elegant. That's stupid. Great, I fix it. But I'm very picky about code. With this, I just want code that is reasonable, that is chunked up appropriately in small modules, small classes. Well, I'm defining the modules, but small functions that can easily be understood just kind of by glancing at them. So let's see what happens if we apply this sort of style. Actually, so just to highlight it out here, I'm not going to go through everything, but I want implementation details tucked away in nice little single purpose functions. Don't want local mutation. I want not variables, but consts. I want to use functional stream pipelines where I can, and so on. Ultimately, small functions, one function, one responsibility. Then there's some specifics at the bottom about the language. So all this goes into the prompt and gets sent up. What I've done for my chat clients, this, if you're doing like Copilot, you can use Copilot instructions.md under the GitHub directory at the root, and you can store these sorts of things there. Claude Code provides similar mechanisms for giving it pretty much canned pieces of a prompt that it's going to assemble when it sends things up. Let's take a look at doing this one more time then. So I'm going to, before I lose it, copy this. And then I'm going to head over to a custom GPT. These are pretty easy to make. I decided I wanted one that was kind of a sarcastic and whatnot, so it is. So let's see. Hey, tell me my JS Jeff guidelines. You can name things, by the way. Certainly give things that you tend to type a lot, short names. G for generate, if you like. You can do that sort of thing. So if I say G in some prompt, it'll know to generate the test code. So this gives me a summary of that. This is fairly similar to what you saw in its own words as it regurgitates it. Anyway, so there's the guidelines. They are baked into all my prompts through this chat client, and therefore I'm ready to go. Let's try this one more time. Okay, and let's hope it remembers. I still have to tell it once in a while, did you forget the style rules? What you see come out of this looks a lot like what I code when I do this kata that I've done manually probably a few hundred times. Yeah, it's very short functions. We typically have an entry-level function normalized name that kind of summarizes the overall algorithm or policy of the thing, but doesn't go into the details. It's aided by these other functions, format part, split name, trim name, that you can kind of look at. They're all 1 to 3 lines worth of code, and you can very quickly sense whether or not these are good things or not. Very functional in nature. There's no state hidden in here anywhere. So this is the kind of thing that I claim, and again, I'm trying to find time to do research to prove this, that it's going to have a higher compliance rate. So now let's take this out. We already vetted the test. I'll just quickly glance at them. Notice it didn't add any behaviors in here, which is kind of cool. You might still want to run code coverage tools to make sure that you have 100% coverage. Because if you don't, and you like all your examples, then it's added some production code in the mix that you didn't ask for. So you probably want to get it out of there. But having this kind of code also makes it I'm sorry, this kind of code also makes it far easier to scan and sense whether or not something is amiss. I can glance at this and know, yeah, it looks about right. I'm not going to delve into each and every line, but it looks pretty good. I'm not going to spend more than about 30 seconds glancing at this thing. That's not a glance, it's longer than a glance. Looking at that thing. Okay, so I've copied the production code, I think. Let's come back over here and gut this and paste that. My nicer looking code. Let's make sure the name is the same. Yes, it is. And run this again. And then, yeah, we do have compliance as well. So kind of cool. I like the code now. If I needed to have a discussion about how it's formatting the parts, I could very quickly focus and say, well, okay, I need to add some code around focusing on format parts. Maybe everyone wanted to extract this to another module, which is only concerned with formatting. Now I can have that kind of discussion with the LLM and do it all in an automated sense through it as well, by focusing on something, just tiny. I will use this technique if I have something that doesn't run. I've got a couple other exercises, which one almost universally does not generate right. So I typically will tell it, all right, let's go take this function and let's try writing some more tests around it. Does that help? Yes, no. Well, sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. Let me move it out of the module and completely consider it as a separate module. Does that help? And by the time I get there, one of those will have generally worked to get it to pass everything.
Jeff, I got a quick question for you
Yes.
regarding your custom LLM. Do you ever use that as agent mode with an existing code base and just say refactor the code base to use arrows everywhere and follow these naming conventions?
No, and the more I learn about token costs and stuff, the more I'm like, eek, I don't know. I should, and I'll be honest, I really haven't had as much time as I'd like to play around with it. I don't trust agents to not waste copious tokens. I saw that yesterday. I was working with something. I asked it to generate the test, and then it's like, oh, I got it wrong. Let me do it again. And then, okay, well, that's not the TypeScript linter is not happy. So, do you want me to fix this? And I'm like, well, let me just play along. And it's like, oh my God, it generated chewed up so many tokens. And maybe they're not the high cost kind of tokens, but still, I think there's a lot of things that I'd rather do myself. I'm going to go back though to maybe better answer the question, which is I try not to do that anyway. I don't really care about that stuff anymore. I do when I'm working in the code bases we have to hand maintain. But otherwise, I'm trying to get it to the point where I don't really care about the code. I try to build all my modules as closed, and that's going to come up in a few slides. And by the way, the rest of this is fairly short. We're going to blast through it, so we'll be able to get to Q&A. But yeah, I try to focus on the open close principle, which anybody remember the OCP? What's the OCP? Now I'm testing you, since you asked the question, Dustin.
Open for extension, closed for modification.
Meaning, if I can close off all the code in a module, all that logic, and never have to touch it again, that would be an ideal system. Out of sight, out of mind, no more a maintenance consideration until I actually had to change the stuff in there. You couple that with single responsibility principle, which says,
What was the framing that I heard of it? A code changes for one and only one
one and
reason.
only reason. But I mean, I think small, cohesive classes is maybe another way of stating that. Cohesion and SRP are pretty darn close, if not the same thing. So you take those two together and you basically build a system where you have small modules, which this thing will generate pretty darn well. All those little tiny clumps of logic. Once you start, introducing the need for state in them, it gets a little dicier. But yeah, the smaller something is, the more likely you have the chance to have it generate fully correctly, and then hopefully put it out of sight, out of mind. So you start thinking in terms of macro design considerations. How do I build a system like that? How do I build a system where I'm kind of conceiving all of my classes or modules as just closed components? That's what I want. So yeah, let's come back to the slides. Does that answer your question sufficiently, or you want more?
All good, thank you.
Okay. You're still going to need all your other skills. So I said a few times that I'm trying to not touch the individual lines of code, the statements, the guts of a function or the guts of a method. I still need all the other skills I learned about in Software Development 101 and OO Design 102 and so on. They are still extremely valuable, and so is the notion of being able to come up with the tests or examples in the first place that you're going to translate into tests. So I still have to know how to think like a tester and make sure I'm covering all those edge cases and exceptional conditions and so on that I'm trying to come up with. This is a fun little acronym, by the way. This is a good little article to read about TDD Guided by Zombies by James Grenning, which he talks through what are all of the zero, one, many kinds of things. Anyway, worthwhile read, and it's a skill. It's not a terribly tough skill to acquire, but it's still something that you're going to need to understand if you decide to build software in this manner, which is start with the expected outcomes by expressing them in the form of examples. Skylar's big on outcome driven, so this is very outcome driven. We could do all this, but I want to kind of sum up all this stuff. I honestly think in the era of LLMs, we will never get to the point where it will always comply. It will always build the code that you specify through the form of examples that get translated into tests. There's always going to be that statistical probability that it gets something wrong, always. So you will always want a mechanism whereby you've got the test in place that lets you know whether or not this is the right software. This is by and large the fastest means I've found to getting there. If someone's got a better approach, let me know. But yeah, I think it's the way to go. Test-driven development's great. I love it for my hand coding of things, but to me, it just gets in the way to here to think about all those incremental, granular steps in going from zero to one to many and so on, which again, it's a wonderful way to develop as a human, but I can generate a module, and if I decide I want to add a new requirement, which I was about to show you on the additional slides, I just resend you my examples. If I don't even have the examples still, I tell it to take the test I have, generate examples from the test. I can just spew the test at it too, but I can also get my examples back if I want to start maybe doing some analysis and design with my product owner and business analyst and so on, so that we have a nice common way of talking about this, and then feed the examples back in with the newly added requirements for this class. I do think we will hit a new generation of AI, whatever they're calling this, artificial general intelligence, AGI. I think at that point there is a potential that it will be able to fully handle everything on its own. I don't want to trust the agents. At this point, no, I'm not big on it because I don't want it to go and chew for 10 minutes and spend a lot of tokens, but also I think this is a nice simple way of doing things. It doesn't really require a lot of effort on your part. The effort, which maybe is where the first effort should always be, is on understanding that outcome. The second part of that understanding outcome, the most important part of it, is making sure everybody's in agreement. And the best way to do that, I think, is through in the form of examples. That's where all BDD comes from, Gherkin, given, when, then. All that's predicated around the best way for us to come up with a contract that we can all agree on in terms of, is this the software we want and how it should work? The examples are the place to start. So all that falls in line with the, where the thinking went into this. I've got some things on the slide for you folks to try and play with things. The stock portfolio is the one I'm currently writing about in the Substack, and trying to get really nitty and gritty and detailed and start talking about bigger systems where you've got, let's say a typical microservice and multiple architectural layers. So I would suggest, take some examples of your favorite. Try to come up with examples, by the way, that are not well known. Because if you come up with examples that are well known, katas, let's say Mars rover, is one, you're going to get a what's close to a canned example that it regurgitated from its little wonderful store of a trillion lines of code. So stock portfolio is fun. SoundX is one that I love. There's a SoundX thing at Wikipedia. It's just a simple algorithm to basically transform a last name into a four-character code, but it almost always gets this one wrong. I haven't tried it in a while, so I'm kind of looking forward with five that's out now. That's really cool. There's some tactics for I'm spinning wheels. I've generated this 6 times and it's still failing. You can ask it, well, what's the problem? You can have this conversation with it. You can look at smaller sets of tests. Go back. Maybe I don't build the whole thing. Let me start with 0, 1, many, make sure I'm golden with that, and then incrementally add the examples. But now we're kind of back to this much slower way of development, starting to get more incremental. It is with the improvements in the LLMs, I don't find myself nearly having to do as many of these things as I used to have. Um, you know, you can always, along the way, there's certainly calls for doing some of the things we still love to do as craftspeople when it comes to building code. Every once in a while, I will ask it to refactor an ugly function, usually an existing one that it didn't build in the first place or I didn't build. Yesterday, I asked it to generate a bunch of tests. You can ask it to describe the code. You can recharacterize, which is a cool little thing, which says, all right, I had you generate some tests and code, and it's great, but you know what? Let me have you recharacterize it and see if any new tests come into play. See if there are any other interesting insights that it itself gleans when it's trying to characterize the code with some tests around it. And every once in a while, I find out something like, oh yeah, I didn't even think of that. But yeah, ultimately it's a companion. I mean, it's a kind of a stupid one, a childish companion a lot of times, but you can ask it no end of things. One of the best things you can do is say, well, okay, I didn't like your answer, so can you give me a better way to express that prompt? So I think this is called, there's a term for it. Forget prompt sequencing. No, that's not quite it. Whatever. Create new terms, new commands, as mentioned, come up with something that summarizes the same kinds of things you're doing over and over. When it doesn't abide by a rule, all my little style rules, I always generally would, I was early on, I was just like, okay, you keep seeming to not care about this rule. Give me a better way to express it so that you will generally pay attention to it. It's always good. Last set of points, and then I'll open up to questions and answers. Basically, we are trying to shift toward where I'm trying to get folks to shift toward a world where we care again about these core design principles. We want modules that are closed. So get this module done, throw it over here and use it when I need to use it or where I need to use it in my system. Generate modules that are pluggable. Think about how might I make a system that supports the open close principle, which again states I want to extend a module system by dropping in a new module rather than opening up and changing an existing one. Make sure you generate things that are single responsibility. So these are kind of the overriding principles. And then you start thinking, well, there's all sorts of wonderful patterns that we learned about 30 years ago. That design patterns book came out, by the way, 30 years ago, and they still are legitimate. You just don't want to overdo them. But you think about patterns like strategy, state pattern, factory, they're all about modularizing things such that you can drop in little pieces of the solution without impacting any other dependencies in the system. Pipelines nowadays, if I'm doing a lot of JavaScript, TypeScript, that sort of thing, and certainly in C Sharp, you got lambdas and whatnot. You can absolutely, if you can generate a solution in the form of a pipeline, you're going to have a much better deal with fixing things in it and getting the right code in the first place. As mentioned, usually if you start doing things like hand rolling loops, you're involving localized state typically, and it's just going to be something that's harder to maintain and less likely to be right in the first place. All right, summing up, it will be wrong. Make sure you follow the prime directive. Make sure you verify everything. So CACs, create, assess, execute is the simple loop kind of for this. Have it create the test and the code at the same time. What a brilliant thought. And there's other people that have come up with that idea. But I had never heard of it until I dreamed up something. Because I was sitting there bracking my brain, like, why is test-driven development so sucky with this? Assess your test, run the test, ship it when it's good. And then along with that, make sure that you're providing a style that make sure you're thinking about solving problems at the modular or class level, focusing on the interfaces of things. Scan the things. Don't sweat the details. It generates ugly little old school procedural loops once in a while. I'm like, okay, that's fine. I don't care because I'm not going to ever sit down and manually try to edit this thing. So I will never sit down and do step by step on it. But ultimately, what's key in here is to remember that the individual statements don't really matter much anymore, but that design certainly does, which means your skills that you've built to this point in time as a designer, a developer, engineer, whatever you want to call yourself, those all matter. There's only one small piece of thing that's going away for the time being. And you can always get the LLM to help with that, but ultimately you're the one who's piecing together the system. So you still matter. All right. So thanks. Sorry, it was kind of a sloppy here in spots. But yeah, what kind of questions does anyone have or challenges? I love challenges because I love to be learn something new. Maybe I can stop talking about this. David.
Hey, so I was curious if you've tried to get it to like pretend that it's a senior software engineer or like someone that works at a successful startup to see if it can generate code that leans in a more like senior or a different type of style than it would otherwise normally generate. Have you tried doing that at all?
I actually have not, and it's an interesting experiment. I would absolutely try. I mean, I'll write that one down and give it a go. I mean, that's unfortunately my brain doesn't quite work in that sort of creative manner as much. So usually I'm more like, oh, here's some guidelines, here's some rules, here's some blah blah blah. So that's me more. I love the creative people who I got a lot of ideas from earlier on in terms of how to express things. But yeah, that's an interesting idea. So I guess my question would be, what would you expect to come out of that differently than what it's going to spew by default?
I've noticed that in my personal experience, like we have a code base with the client I'm currently working for. I'm also a consultant. And they pointed their own internal version of I think it was their own homegrown chat GPT at their documentation, their code base, and a lot of stuff. And they said, all right, well, we've got some stuff that the interns worked on, and we've got some stuff that has been reviewed by all the lead developers in the company. This is more generally like here's where the divide should be, and it usually generates better code in this situation. But I
Interesting.
haven't tried doing unit tests with it quite yet. There's been a couple of situations where we use GitHub Copilot embedded with Visual Studio, and that gives it a little bit better context to our internal stuff compared to the web browser. But I think it works a little differently depending on if you have it pretend. We had a workshop on prompt engineering once upon a time where you can kind of get around some of the like the safety guidelines or the guardrails if you get it to pretend that it's somebody else. Like pretend that you're a lead dev. What does this code look like? Or how would you critique this in a PR or something? And it's a fun time.
Okay, I mean, yeah, it does sound awesome. I definitely want to look at that. We did one of my peers put together a pull request kind of reviewer thing. So it does all the work through an agent. Did a pretty good job of it. But yeah, I'm curious to see how it differentiates you when you give it a different persona, if you will. That is a pretty interesting idea. What else? Okay. Yeah, thanks for the thought. So many things I haven't tried. Yeah, Copilot's wonderful for doing the code ingestion. I find where battling the whole thing right now is if you do produce, let's say, a layered architecture, you're trying to develop a module to drop in place. It can be a little trying at times to say, well, okay, you're going to be dependent on this interface from these other modules because that's already in existence as part of, let's say, a domain class or something of that sort. So that can be challenging. But yeah. Other questions? Ben?
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. Hey, how do you so I guess I've been working a lot with like actual AI, like doing generating embeddings and sort of kind of hooking up like my own data source and stuff with that. And I guess ironically, it feels like I've been trying to use, LLMs to help me kind of do discovery and like kind of work through that. And I feel like ironically, like it can be very bad at doing like finding out what that is. And I feel like some of that is because of the space, the surface of doing that thing has changed very, very quickly, over the last year, year and a half, I guess. So like is there a way, I guess, to, how do you approach like, hey, I want things that are more recent, versus things that are even just like a year old or something. I really struggle, I guess, getting more relevant information out of it versus stuff that, simply either doesn't exist or, is, the wrong way to do it now.
I think you're alluding to what we're kind of seeing as well with just various versions of things like Prisma, which is something we're using for database stuff, Fastify, both, types node modules and for doing stuff. So yeah, we do tend to struggle around the areas of more recent stuff that it wasn't, explicitly trained on. I don't even know necessarily how all of that is piecing together. It's piecing all that together, but yeah, I think is that kind of what you're alluding to? Is that with more recent data, it's just not going to be as good of an answer? Is that?
Right. Yeah. And I've taken approaches like, you know, basically dirty chunking all of like the actual documentation like I want it to use, and then being like, okay, this is sort of your Bible, use this type of thing. And I just have not found like I haven't had good outcomes, I guess, from any sort of solution that I tried to sort of force this thing to do it.
Yeah, honestly, no, I don't think I have any better experiences there. Um, I think there's two insights. I don't know if they're accurate insights, but two things that pop into mind. One is which maybe the best thing is to settle on known stable technologies, and that may well be what ends up happening in this space until something arises that is far more in tune with what the LLM wants to deal with. And we're dealing with, you look at the evolution of JavaScript and all the world of no end of libraries for it, frameworks, and so on and so on. And to me, that was kind of a misspent youth in the 2010s of let's find the next better framework and just was never ending. And maybe the better answer would have been let's take what we have and find a way to make them a lot more easily usable. Just dumb things like dependency hell that you end up with. No, we didn't do that. We spent time trying to find a better dependency tool. So from Node to Yarn to whatever else. Just no end of wasted time. So yeah, maybe one answer is let's settle on something that is slightly older and then it's more likely to have been trained on. I don't know if it's a great answer, but it would be kind of nice if things unnecessarily kept trying to progress forward. So in other words, you still see all the changes with the .NET C# language. Is that sort of thing ultimately necessary? I mean, can we not solve the problems with what we have? And I don't know. I'm not taking that as a hard position, but I'm saying this may well be what starts to happen as a net effect of something that was trained on necessarily older things, just given it long training time. And that's going to speed up too. So I think before we're done with LLMs, there may well be much faster ways to train these, or just more, uh, general overuse of what's the right word? Burning more things and destroying the environment so much faster. So, that might be one solution. So yeah, I don't have a good answer for it, but it absolutely does better on older technologies, older stuff.
All right. Yeah, thank you. If nothing else, I appreciate the shared pain. So
Yeah. Other thoughts? Has anybody tried anything similar?
See, Morgan's got his hand up as
I
well.
was
I
just
can.
gonna add on to that. I have the same problem, but I think it's because the models are all trained on 6 to 12 month old data, and so I have to do the same thing, feed in all the links, everything I want to get to, and then I think especially when Microsoft's documents don't match, they're not even keeping up with how they're changing in the AI space, and so the documents end up being lagging behind there. So when you're trying to use things in semantic kernel or whatever it ends up being, they're changing all of the functionality so fast, even the docs don't match up. So I
Hmm.
haven't found a better way either.
It,
Uh,
yeah, and I'm gonna go back to, I mean, so I've always told people it's like it costs money to stay up to date, but it also costs money and probably more to not stay up to date. And most of you probably know what I mean. It's like you know, it's going to take some effort to go from one version to the next of all the dependencies, the languages, and so on. But I've had plenty of occasions working on stuff where they were fixed at a version, they couldn't move it forward. Essentially, ultimately, that fully locks you into that for essentially the lifetime of the system. And now your costs go way up when you need a new thing that you cannot get. So, you know, I don't know. I think things will change as a result, but I don't know how that's going to play out.
One of the things that I've been thinking about a lot, and I tried to take an AI agent mode first approach with the side client that I was working on last month. And that promptly had me increase the level of my subscription with GitHub Copilot because I burnt through all my tokens pretty quick. Um, but I keep thinking about that Albert Einstein quote. We cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them. So I'm still trying to wrap my head around where we see that pendulum kind of landing. Um, the part where maybe we don't have to embrace some of the clean code principles, if you will, where everything has to be solid and we're making it really nice and easy to read, where maybe it's more token friendly to avoid deduplicating your code and having some things be, copied in a lot of classes across the board. So at least that one class is kind of fully encapsulated and doesn't need to pull in other modules. And or at what point are we going to have such a big mess on our hands that there's going to be, in 2 to 5 years, a tremendous amount of rescue work where we have so much code out there and then we can't dig out of it. But one other quick little thing, when I was out in Denver last week, I was mobbing with Llewellyn Felico, and having mobbed with him before, knowing how structured he is for some of those practices, it was really interesting how, we had the CLI open, we were using the voice to text input for it. So we were really just kind of talking at the computer and having it generate the code. But I noticed even that red-green refactor pattern was starting to slip a little bit, where it's just so easy to just keep generating code and committing it without even really looking at it. So there's no real question there, but I'm just, that open-ended curiosity of where is this going to land and what are
Well,
some of the foundational things that we continue to lean into or
right. I mean, there is an inevitable outcome, which is maybe not with LLMs, but with AGI. You give it your interests. I think you'll still want to express them in the form of actual examples, so it knows, there's less ambiguity in it. But the ultimate end is you give the examples, it generates a whole system, and then at that point, you don't give a hoot anything under the covers, and that's the end of programming as we know it. I don't know. That might be 10, 15 years out, but it might be considerably sooner. I have no idea. Think of it as an evolution, and if you look at the whole Kurzweil thing, it's like it's just orders of magnitude advancement in more and more rapid time frames. You think about where we started from, which is assembly or flipping switches on a computer to assembly language to higher level languages to reusable functions. I had to write my own sort routine in 1983 or so. I had to write my own printer driver and that sort of thing. So we had some bare bones tools back then, and those disappeared when we started moving through the 80s. And here we are now at the level. It's like, we can certainly generate whole functions and most of the time whole classes. So it'll take that one big leap in some period of time going forward. And I mean, I've seen enough, and I know there's skeptics. I know there's fear. I've got that. I hope to last for, 4 more years of this before I can retire. Um, but it's real. It's not going to disappear. It could be stuck. There's the optimist view that says we will never get to AGI. I mean, it's pessimistic slash optimist view. It might not happen in our lifetime, but I think likely it will. That'd be where my money was. But for now, I think it is still all your developer skills are going to come to play, just not as much programming individual lines, unless you want to do it that way, in which case you're going to go less quickly than you might do with this approach. I have fun with this. So that's the other thing. Kent Beck, in his little Substack, basically said he was having a blast with it. And he kind of stepped back recently. He's like, yeah, sometimes this is a lot more headache than I want to deal with trying to force fit things into the mix using what he calls it augmented code generation or something like that. So still fun. I'm still really enjoying this. All right. Well, thank you for having me out to chat. Really enjoyed getting to see all you folks. Well, the ones who are on camera.
Thank you very much, Jeff. This is enjoyable, and